Telegraph columnist Simon Heffer and Fiaz Mughal from Tell Mama and Faith Matters. And at 9, Vladimir Putin says migrants come to Europe to milk our benefit system. He's wrong again, isn't he? So lots to come up on the programme, but first we are going to spend an hour with the new Brexit secretary. Well, I say new, he's been in the job, since the beginning of July or thereabouts. Dominic Raab is here. I'll be interviewing him and we'll be taking your calls. Always a good sign, full switchboard before we've even started.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Ian Dale on LBC.
Well, Dominic, welcome to LBC. Fascinated to hear what you've got to say over the next hour. And, of course, I'm sure you'll be equally fascinated to hear what Theresa May has been saying to the dinner in Salzburg, which I think is starting about now, isn't it? What is the task of the Prime Minister this evening?
Well, look, we set out our proposals. They've involved compromises, we all know that, and they're ambitious for the partnership we want with our EU partners. So they're ambitious, they're pragmatic, and we now need the EU side to move in our direction. And I think the opportunity is there for the PM to spell out why this is a win-win deal, good for Britain, good for the EU, but also the fact that actually if we don't get that movement, it will be lose-lose for the EU and for the UK.
Is it true that she's only got 10 minutes to set out her case?
Well, look, she's got a decent slot. I don't know exactly how many minutes over the dinner. And, of course, they will then have a separate item on the agenda to discuss this at length amongst the 27 tomorrow. And I think that's quite important because there are some candid conversations that need to be had between EU member states. That's for them to do, but it's going to be important.
I mean, we hear that there's been a concerted effort by you and your colleagues, particularly over the summer, to talk to individual EU politicians to try and put pressure on the Commission to maybe rein in Monsieur Barnier. Any truth in that?
No, but look, I've been out to Brussels since early July 5 times. So last couple of meetings for an extended period. I spoke to Michel Barnier last Friday. Obviously, that track is crucially important, but we're getting member states from France to Germany to some of the smaller countries asking us to explain some of the proposals, and that's a good thing because we want to make sure they're properly understood and to make sure it's understood why it's good for frictionless trade between UK businesses, EU businesses, why it's the only credible plan to resolve the Northern Ireland issue. So actually we should have those conversations as well.
Well, we'll come on to some of those rather difficult issues in just a moment, but what's Michel Barnier like to deal with? Because when he was with David Davis, there was lots of smiles. It's all a little bit more sombre between you and him, isn't it?
I'm not sure. Look, we're both negotiators representing, for me, the UK. That's what matters to me. And he's got a job to do representing the EU. There's all sorts of pressures on that side. We also meet when we get together for the formal negotiations. We have a private chat one-on-one. He's very friendly. He's a very sort of Gaullist Frenchman in the sort of Charles de Gaulle mode and model, but there's a lighter side to him, and he's very friendly and he's very straight talking. And actually, if you're engaged in a negotiation like this, I think it's valuable to have someone that you can have a straight, candid conversation with.
And how candid do these conversations get? Because I read, I don't know whether it was Tim Shipman was doing a readout from one of these negotiations, and he was supposed to have lost his temper with you. Did that happen?
No, not really. He's quite a mercurial character.
Not really,
on
but
occasion.
It did a little bit then.
Look, I'm not going to betray the integrity of the negotiating room, and these sometimes can be quite intense negotiations, but they've always been professional and friendly, and we get on just fine.
David Davis is making a speech tomorrow. Obviously, your predecessor. You know him well. I know him well. I suppose we ought to declare an interest here in that I think you succeeded me as his chief of staff,
that's right.
Didn't we? So, but that's not going to affect the way I interview you, I can assure you. David Davis is saying in a speech tomorrow, the EU is often correctly described as having a democratic deficit, but Chequers is devoid of democracy altogether. Now, there are a lot of people who think that if you weren't the Brexit secretary, you would be campaigning with David Davis against Chequers. Why aren't you?
Well, look, there's a bunch of assumptions in there I just don't accept. The number one thing at this crucial time is to get Brexit over the line. You know that there's all sorts of people that want to trip it up. I want to see it delivered. I also just, huge admiration and respect for DD, old friend like you, but I just take a different view of this, which is that, of course, Chequers involves some compromises, but in any negotiation like this, it would. And as for the democratic point, look, the reality is we've agreed to sign up to the common rule book on manufactured goods and agri-food. And that is to make sure at the border EU and UK trade can travel smoothly, and it helps to resolve the Northern Ireland issue. But the idea that that means that we're not going to be taking back full democratic control over all the other areas, ending free movement, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, I'm just, with respect, don't agree with him on that.
But the problem is, well, he ought to know because he did the job for more than 2 years. The problem is that many people describe Chequers as Brexit in name only because we would be rule takers. We would have no influence, no control over any new regulations that were brought in by the European Union. Now, if you haven't got full control over those regulations, it is Brexit in name only, isn't it?
Well, but of course, the Common Rule Book only covers manufactured goods and agri-food. It doesn't.
Well, that's quite a big section of the economy.
Well, look, it's critically important for frictionless trade across the border. Those set of rules have remained relatively stable. We've got broadly similar standards, but in relation to the 90 whatever the vast majority of other EU rules, we will have democratic control. And even in relation to agri-food and manufactured goods, Parliament will have a lock, will have the last word. Now, obviously, if we decided not to follow the EU in those areas, that would have consequences for the relationship, and there's all sorts of dispute resolution mechanisms for how you handle it. But I don't think you can say because on manufactured goods and agri-food alone we accept the rules, we would be giving up democratic control overall.
That would be the European Court of Justice that would resolve these disputes, would it not? So yet again, we were told by the Prime Minister many times, Lancaster House, other speeches, that there would be no influence from the European Court of Justice over British law. That's not true under Chequers, is it?
No, it's absolutely true because, yes, in relation to common rules, we would want on the UK side, just as the EU would, to understand how they would be interpreted. But any dispute resolution, any jurisdiction over disputes will be decided by arbitration. That's very clearly in Chequers. So, and the arbitration model for people
that's cherry picking, isn't it? And the EU aren't going to agree to that.
Well, it's a different point. But on arbitration, we get to appoint an arbitrator, the EU do, and they pick a third, and it's a balanced process both sides can have confidence in. And whether or not the EU would accept it, well, actually, if you look at the vast majority of EU free trade deals, let alone global ones, they use that arbitration model. So it's a good example where, sure, people have been quick to rubbish Chequers, but I wonder how many people who have done that have actually read any of the 100 pages of the detailed proposals. Yes, they do involve compromise. I want to be upfront about that, but I don't think it's the sellout that some people are sort of saying.
Would we be able to sign free trade deals with other countries under Chequers?
Yes, absolutely. Now, it's true to say, well, we wouldn't have control over our manufacturing regulation.
Well, exactly, and that's why there will be no incentive for countries. I remember having the Australian High Commissioner sitting in that chair not that long ago saying that if this happened, Australia wouldn't really be interested in a free trade agreement.
Well, no, because we'd be able to, A, control all the regulation over services, which is a huge part of the UK economy, and crucially, we'd have total control over our tariffs from agriculture to manufacturing goods. So we'd be able to reduce those, and that's a massive win-win advantage for some of the growth economies of the future, from Latin America to Asia, which even the EU recognises will be the areas where the extra wealth, the new prosperity will come in the future.
But do you see why people do refer to this as Brexit in name only, when we wouldn't have total control over signing free trade agreements, we wouldn't have control over new regulations that the EU might want to impose. And therefore, what you've got here is an alliance of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Anna Soubry, which I never thought even this government could manufacture.
Well, look, I don't accept that it's Brexit in name only. I do recognise there have been compromises, but look, Anna and Jacob have got their views, and I did question time with Anna just after the referendum. I know how passionately she feels about this. But the reality is that those are two people. I'm not going to say at the extreme of the debate, but we sort of airbrush out.
You just did.
Well, no, I'm not going to say that. But we airbrush out the 80% of people that or MPs, and most importantly, people in the country who recognise, yes, we need to be faithful to the referendum, take back control of our borders, our laws and our money, but also come to a compromise resolution with the EU so frictionless trade is maintained. And look, it may not be perfect, but it's the most credible plan, which means that we keep our EU trade, which is crucially important, we're free to trade more energetically with the growth markets of the future, and resolves the Northern Ireland conundrum.
When you have the European Research Group rejecting Chequers, when you have most of the Conservatives who support remaining in the European Union rejecting Chequers, when you have the European Commission effectively rejecting Chequers, It's effectively dead in the water, isn't it? There's got to be a different way forward. And when the Prime Minister says, well, it's checkers or no deal, she's not telling the truth, is she? Because there has to be some middle way there.
Well, Chequers is the middle way, and it represents the compromise I've just described. So it is a ambitious set of proposals, but it's pragmatic. And we can always cite the critics, but I've had a lot of people come to me and say, we understand that this is going to be a negotiation which involves some compromises. And on the Leave and the Remain side, you'd be surprised how many people who aren't jumping up and down on Twitter or coming on to the airwaves to express their views, which I've got no problem with. You'd be surprised how many people recognise that now is the time to close in on a deal which will be faithful to the referendum, good for businesses and trade and jobs, but also preserve things like our security cooperation.
Do you not think, though, that the last 2 years has all been about Britain compromising and the European Union not compromising, and that so far the negotiations have been handled fairly shambolically and the European Union has effectively got what it wants?
Look, I've been in this job since July. I think we talked about David Davis. I think he did a great job in resolving the lion's share of the withdrawal agreement, that sort of divorce settlement before. You're absolutely right to say, though, that having made these proposals and have compromised the way we have, now is the moment where the EU needs to shift. I think they understand that. I think if you look at some of the mood music, the statement by Jean-Claude Juncker that the Chequers proposals would be the starting point for our future relationship on the economy, the progress that Michelle and I have made on security, I think there is an understanding that we're approaching the end point of these negotiations, and there will need to be some movement on the EU side.
The Financial Secretary to the Treasury, Mel Stride, was in this studio on Cross Question last week. He seems to have put the cat among the pigeons this afternoon. I don't know if you've invited him in for an interview without coffee, but he's essentially talking up the possibility of a second referendum, which is quite something for a government minister to do.
I didn't read I haven't heard his words. I mean, feel free to quote them.
He says, I suspect those to the right of the party, the pro-Brexit wing, will be very concerned that if that deal doesn't prevail, they'll end up in a situation where we could have a second referendum and we could end up not leaving the EU altogether. There is the danger of that happening if Chequers doesn't prevail. Well, do you agree with him?
Well, so first of all, what he's saying is that if actually we end up with no deal, the risk is that Parliament, because of the arithmetic, might try and direct the government a certain way. I don't think that's a likely outcome, but I do think it's absolutely crucial when we get down to the wire that people focus on what will be a binary choice. The Chequers deal, yes, with some compromises, but good for this country, maintaining our relationship in the areas that we want with the EU, and the alternative of no deal. Now, I've been making the case that we've got the plans in place that Britain could deal with no deal. We could deal with the disruption, the short-term risks, but I don't think anyone should be under any illusions that there are those risks and that it would be a suboptimal outcome.
Well, we'll come on to that in a moment, but if in the end, if you're right, and if Parliament couldn't agree the way forward, and the Prime Minister said to you, well, Dominic, the only way now is to have another referendum, what would you say?
No, and the Prime Minister's been very clear to me and to the country that we're not having a second referendum.
Well, she said we wouldn't have a general election, but we did.
Well, look, I think it was you that early on, when I got into politics, said don't answer hypothetical questions. But the government's position's very clear on all this.
Right.
And let me just say on the second referendum, the reason why it's a mistake to bandy this around, the reason why I think Keir Starmer, who I respect on the Labour side, is wrong about this. First of all, as a matter of principle, I think a lot of people would think that it wasn't respecting democracy. And even more important, as we go into these negotiations, if we said that we were going to have a second referendum on the outcome, we'd be inviting the EU to offer us the worst terms.
You see, the problem is, a lot of people say the same about Chequers. They say that doesn't respect what people voted for. It doesn't respect that 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU, and this is not leaving the EU.
It's leaving the EU, it's leaving the single market and the customs union. We get an independent trade policy, end of free movement.
But we don't. You've already admitted that we don't get a totally independent trade policy, and we effectively stay within the single market.
No, we don't effectively stay in the single market.
Well, we do if we're accepting their regulations.
If you're in the single market, you will be open to free movement. We've made clear free movement will end. If you're in the single market, you'll be subject to the direct jurisdiction of the European Court. That won't happen. And in relation to the common rules, we're signing up to a fraction of the rules that will be part of the single market. So I accept the case for compromise. I'm not candy coating that.
What fraction?
I don't know. Do you know what? I'm looking to see what it is. But if you look at the whole...
Is it 2%? Is it 10%? Is it 50%?
I don't know, and I need to find out a reliable way to measure it. But if you look not just at the economic rules, but then you look at the social employment policy rules, and then you look at the criminal justice rules, you're talking about a fraction of the overall number of rules.
This is where people, I think, find it difficult, because if you say, well, we're only signing up to a fraction, and then you can't tell me what that fraction is, or even a ballpark figure of what that fraction is, then people are suspicious that it might be 70% rather than 7%.
But what I'm trying to do is give you an illustration. You've got common rules on agricultural products and manufactured products, but if you take the huge swathe of other economic and social policy rules, and then the criminal and justice rules, and all of those other areas will have full control.
Right, we are going to talk about the possibility of no deal. We'll talk about the so-called Project Fear in a moment, and then I promise you we're going to come to your calls. 0345 6060 973. It's 90 minutes past 7.
This is LBC.
Ocean Credit Card.
If you're looking for a credit card with a credit limit up to £1,500, go to checkocean.co.uk and see in seconds if you'll be accepted for an Ocean credit card before you apply. Checking won't affect your credit rating, so it's a no-brainer. Find out if it's a yes. Go now to checkocean.co.uk. 39.9% APR representative variable. Intelligent Lending Limited is a credit broker. Capital One is the exclusive lender.
Checkocean.co.uk.
Hi, I'm a sale. A sale your business can make if your phone system is a Vonage phone system. Then you and your team will be able to make calls anywhere on any device, so you can communicate easily, generate ideas, brainstorm, find more sales, like me.
Answer every opportunity with Vonage. Just visit vonage.co.uk or call 0203 435 8000. Terms and conditions apply.
Based on Sarah Waters' best-selling novel and from the Academy Award-nominated director of Room, critics are calling The Little Stranger a spine-tingling drama.
A long time ago, was a child here.
Susan died before I was born.
Deliciously dark and mysterious.
Will be explained.
How innocent you are.
Superb. One of the year's finest films. 5 stars.
What happened next is a mystery to me.
The Little Stranger. In cinemas Friday.
Looking for a modern, luxurious holiday? Come and chat celebrity cruises with Dan. He's the expert in European discoveries, the king of Caribbean escapes, and he knows celebrity cruiser ships like the back of his hand. Divine dining? Done. Spas? Sorted. He'll even fix you up with a free classic drinks package and save you money on staterooms.
TUI has expert cruise advisors like Dan in store to help you book your perfect trip. Visit your local TUI holiday store today. Selected sailings and staterooms. T's and C's apply. Booked by 14th of November 2018 at All Protected.
Everyone's asking you if you've ever had PPI, and for a good reason. If you've had a mortgage, loan or credit card in the past, you could be owed thousands. The deadline for making a PPI claim has now been set, so now's the time to text LA Claims to see if you could be due a refund. We'll do a free, no obligation PPI check and let you know if you could be owed money. So don't be off your trolley. Get in touch with LA Claims now. Text WIN to 60012. That's WIN to 60012.
I know who designed Princess Di's wedding dress. I know who phoned home. I know how to do a silly walk. And I know which part of the room you should never put baby in. But I don't know my state pension.
Find out more about your state pension and how much it should be. Get to know your pension. Visit yourpension.gov.uk.
Ian Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
22 minutes past 7. If you'd like to watch us, we're on Facebook Live. We are on the LBC Twitter page and also the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. Let's talk a little bit about so-called Project Fear, which we've had quite a lot of over the past week or so. A lot of people worried about the prospect of no deal and therefore saying, well, if there's a no deal, this is what happens in our particular sector. Don't need to tell you about Jaguar Land Rover. Sky News every day seems to report some new development. Today, they say EU airports unable to cope with safety risks of no deal Brexit, leaked memo reveals. Now, would you deny that if there is indeed no deal, that there will be quite a lot of chaos?
I wouldn't call it chaos, but there will certainly be some short-term risks and disruption that we'll need to either mitigate, manage or avoid. And we've been doing about 2 years of work under David Davis now, under my watch, and we've just set out sort of over 50 technical notices. We've got some more coming out next week where we're explaining and providing guidance, whether it's to businesses, charities, public bodies, about what we do and what they need to do. So yes, there are risks, but we'll be able to manage them.
But some of your colleagues accuse companies like Jaguar Land Rover, BMW and several others of scaremongering and of trying to use Brexit as an excuse to mask their own commercial failings. Now, that's quite a strong accusation. Do you have sympathy with that?
Look, I'm not going to comment in general terms. I think there's a bit of that goes about, but I also would want to recognise that particularly right now, with the uncertainty until we've got the deal that we're ambitious and confident of getting, that for businesses there is an air of uncertainty around, and there are investment decisions that are on hold. Equally, if you look at the economic news last week, growth is accelerating in the economy, real wages are rising quicker than they have been for a while. So I think actually the fundamentals of the economy are in pretty good shape.
But do you accept that particularly in the car industry there is a real problem with this so-called just-in-time supply chain, that if we don't replicate the rules of the single market in some way, a lot of these companies are going to suffer severe difficulties in getting the parts, the components that they need?
Well, some car manufacturers like McLaren are bringing some of the supply chain home. But look, you're right, there's a risk here. It's exactly why the checkers model that you were haranguing earlier is quite important, because it guarantees frictionless trade for those just-in-time manufacturing businesses.
And are you more confident now about the fact that there could be a deal than you were when you took the job?
Yes, I think so, because we've made good progress.
Sound very certain.
Well, it's difficult to judge, because I was reasonably confident, as you know, in early July. We're at a stage now where we've made good progress, particularly on the withdrawal agreement, but also on really important areas like security cooperation. The EU has made some movement in our direction in that area, and we've got two big issues outstanding on the economic partnership and the Northern Ireland issue. But we always thought the way the EU operates, this would go to the wire. So I'm confident we'll get a good deal.
What about a free trade deal? Because obviously that's the next stage. I think some people seem to think this is all about a free trade. It isn't. That comes in the next stage. Would you argue that actually, certainly a lot of people in the European Research Group are arguing that a Canada plus deal, the kind of deal that David Davis always wanted, is the way forward? Now, Number 10 seem to poo-poo that now.
Look, I think there's an attraction to it, but there's a critical flaw to it, which is that the EU will not accept it unless we agree to what's called their version of the Northern Irish backstop, which effectively means that we risk being in a customs union type arrangement indefinitely. And so if we were to offer that without resolving the Northern Ireland issue in the way that the Chequers model does, actually what we'd end up with is no deal. So either no deal, or we'd end up accepting the EU terms and end up in an indefinite customs union. So I think we need to apply some of the small print to some of these counter proposals that people are quite legitimately putting up, and look at that very carefully, because actually that's not on offer from the EU.
You've written a letter to Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour's shadow Brexit secretary, today, which is highly unusual for a government minister to write to his shadow in this way. You suggest that Labour is moving towards a position of suspending Article 50 and delaying Brexit to hold a second referendum. Let me ask you this question. If there was any suggestion from the Prime Minister that in order to get the deal, Article 50 needed to be suspended or delayed for a couple of months, would you resign?
Oh, I'm not sure about resignation, but I'm very clear, and I've discussed this recently, that we won't extend Article 50. We don't need to extend
with the
Article
Prime Minister.
50. Yes, and we discussed it in Cabinet. We will not be extending Article 50, and the reason is we've got enough time. What we need now...
Can I ask why you were even discussing it? Why was it being raised?
Well, we discussed the whole range of issues and the different things that people are putting forward from inside the party and outside the party. But the crucial point is this, that actually what we need now is decisions. We don't need to kick the can down the road anymore. We need decisions. And we've set out our proposals. They're ambitious, they're pragmatic. The EU've got to move. And I don't see why extending Article 50 would make any of the difficult decisions any easier to grapple with. So let's actually seize this, get this resolved. And we've still got a couple of months to hammer out the detail. But I don't think we can duck this any longer. What we need is decisions.
Because I think some people will be quite discombobulated by the fact that you've even been discussing the possibility.
Well, no, it's not. We won't. I didn't say we're discussing the possibility. People have asked
you were
about
discussing
this,
it, though.
and we discuss all the different views that are put forward by the different parties because, we're open-minded about the different views that are around there. We want to be clear what our position is and the basis for it. So actually, Cabinet should be discussing every
So let's just get this straight. 100%, no kicking the can down the road, no extension to Article 50. We will be leaving on the 29th of March, even if it means no deal.
Yes.
OK. We'll go to your calls a little bit later than I'd intended, but let's go to Mark in Palmer's Green. Hello, Mark.
Oh, good evening, Ian, and good evening, Dominic. When Mrs May returns to Parliament with the deal, and let's say possibly it's rejected by Parliament, do we then leave with no deal on the 29th of March next year?
Yes.
We kind of just did that one, didn't we? I suppose.
I mean, look, I'm confident we'll get a deal and we'd get it through Parliament because I think what will happen is, and it's totally understandable and quite right that on an issue like this everyone's got different views, but when we come down to this final vote, as you put it, there'll be a basic binary choice. Do you want the deal we've got, which we've negotiated hard over, which has been, hard going, there have been compromises, or do you want no deal? Now, I'm confident that we could weather and brace ourselves and deal with the disruptions and the short-term risks of no deal, but I also think it's by far and away a worse outcome to a Chequers-style deal. And I think that will focus minds, and I think we'll get the deal through.
What about Jacob Rees-Mogg, Owen Paterson, John Redwood, Ian Duncan-Smith? I could probably reel off 50 names here. People who really do not like Chequers and have made clear that they would vote against it. I'm not sure that there isn't really going to be a vote on the Chequers deal itself, is there? How do you persuade them to sign up to the kind of compromise deal that clearly is going to happen here? Because if enough of them vote to reject it, it can't get through Parliament, can it?
Well, it's certainly right to say the deal that we do, let's say on the Chequers model, which I'm confident we will do, is voted down. People have to think very carefully about the choices. And no deal is, I think, Roberto Azevedo, the Brazilian head of the WTO, I think he put it really well. He said it's not the end of the world, but it wouldn't be a walk in the park either. So when we've got a good deal, which is good for businesses, both trading with the EU and with those growth markets around the world from Latin America to Asia, when it retains our strong security cooperation, but also is faithful to the referendum, I think that will focus minds.
Dominic, we've got half an hour to go. We're going to devote the next half an hour entirely to calls. 0345 6060 973. That's the Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab here with me until 8 o'clock. And then you can put more questions to our cross-question panel. It's an evening of questions here on LBC. Are we getting the answers, though? You decide. It's 7:30. Let's get the news headlines from Tim Humphrey.
The Brexit Secretary has been telling LBC why he's backing the Chequers proposals for leaving the EU. Dominic Raab says signing up to a common rule book for manufactured goods and agri-food doesn't mean Brexit in name only, as some opponents claim.
The idea that that means that we're not going to be taking back full democratic control over all the other areas, ending free movement, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, I'm just, with respect, don't agree with him on that.
Theresa May's just arrived in Salzburg for a meeting with other EU leaders. The Council President, Donald Tusk, has said the UK needs to rework its Brexit proposals over the Irish border. 2 people have been killed by Storm Alley. A man in his 20s died after being hit by a tree in a park in Newry in Northern Ireland. A woman when her caravan blew off a cliff in County Galway in 90-mile-an-hour winds. Transport's been severely disrupted and tens of thousands of people have no power in Scotland and across northern England tonight. So the LBC weather forecast, the strongest winds will ease, but staying very windy in the north and over Scotland tonight with gales and blustery showers. Clearer elsewhere before heavy rain reaches Wales and northern England late in the night. A low of 7 degrees.
This is LBC.
Range Rover Evoque is at home at the city's most stylish addresses and in the countryside's wildest destinations. It can cross continents and take 5 friends to the theatre. It's equally at ease with a walk on the wild side as it is delivering a table of 5 to their favourite restaurant. Range Rover Evoque, born in the wild, adapted to the city. This September, from just £349 a month on Land Rover personal contract hire. Search Evoque offer for details. Land Rover, above and beyond.
Initial rental £4,188, 36-month term, subject to status, 10,000 miles per annum. Mileage and return conditions apply. Offer ends 30th of September 2018. Available at participating retailers only. Visit landrover.co.uk.
The PTA Car Booters. Volunteers teaching Gran about computers. Local heroes coaching kids in sport. Charity champions collecting for causes they support.
PayPal lets charities and not-for-profit groups raise funds online and in person. Adding a donate button to your website is easy. And our contactless card reader lets you collect more than coins, with no recurring monthly fees, just a fee per transaction. Search PayPal for charities and fundraise in more ways. Terms and cost of card reader apply.
Looking for a modern, luxurious holiday? Come and chat Celebrity Cruises with Dan. He's the expert in European discoveries, the king of Caribbean escapes, and he knows celebrity cruiser ships like the back of his hand. Divine dining? Done. Spas? Sorted. He'll even fix you up with a free classic drinks package and save you money on staterooms.
TUI has expert cruise advisors like Dan in store to help you book your perfect trip. Visit your local TUI holiday store today. Selected sailings and staterooms. T's and C's apply. Book by 14th of November 2018 at or protected.
Based on Sarah Waters' best-selling novel and from the Academy Award-nominated director of Room, critics are calling The Little Stranger a spine-tingling drama.
A long time ago, was a child here.
Susan died before I was born.
Deliciously dark and mysterious.
Will be explained.
How innocent you are.
Superb. One of the year's finest films. 5 stars.
What happened next is a mystery to me.
The Little Stranger. In cinemas Friday.
And finally, an epidemic continues to sweep the nation. Thousands of people have been struck by FOMOB, the fear of missing out on business. We go live now to a badly affected area.
It started with a feeling of butterflies every time I thought about missing a client's call. Now I've got 4 phones taped to my face.
If you're afraid of missing an important call from a client, you could be at risk of FOMOB. But never fear, eReceptionist answers and diverts your calls, so you never miss an important opportunity. Go to eReceptionist.co.uk and fight the FOMOB with eReceptionist.
The Volkswagen Transporter from just £239 per month on contract hire now comes with 2 free services. So instead of spending your money on this, you could spend it on this. Or even this. Incredible offers to help your business thrive. Search Volkswagen Transporter to find out more. Volkswagen Commercial Vehicles. Working with you. Business users only, excluding VAT at 20%. Over 36 months. £717 initial rental. T's and C's apply. No ownership. Until the 30th of September 2018. Volkswagen Finance.
Ian Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
25 to 8. Dominic Raab is with us, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union and Conservative MP for Esher and Walton. 0345 6060 973. You can watch us on Facebook on the LBC page or the LBC Twitter page or the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. James is in Glasgow. What would you like to ask, James?
Hi. I'm a designer printmaker. I created a small business with my brother in 2015 where we create limited edition interactive screen prints of endangered species. A no-deal Brexit will affect our business in many ways, all of which are totally unknown to us, which is a huge worry for us, obviously. This will affect both our whole business model and our customer experience, as there's a big question mark about how much extra delivery is going to cost and if our customers will be charged to receive our product based on the value of our artwork. Our shipments are picked up in Glasgow, and if we sell prints inside the EU, it's incredibly quick, easy and cheap business transaction for both ourselves and our customers, where they'll receive prints within roughly 2 to 3 days of us sending them out. These prints go through many customs clearances, and as we have a free trading agreement with the EU, our products cross these borders seamlessly. When we sell our print outside the EU, we have to fill out 4 separate customs forms which have to get attached to our product. This not only takes a lot longer for our products to get delivered, but it also costs a lot more for our customers, who will be majorly affected but also costs a lot more for our customers, and we will be majorly affected by the sales, and this will affect our livelihood. What can you say to people like me, who will be completely affected by a no-deal Brexit?
Well, look, the business interest that you've got and the entrepreneurial instincts that you've got and the fact that you're trading with the EU is precisely what has influenced us with the model, the Chequers model that we've put forward, because it would ensure frictionless trade at the border. And that's our top priority. It's our overriding priority. It's why the Prime Minister is out at this Salzburg summit. We're fighting for businesses just like yours. And if the EU meets us halfway, and we're confident that that a deal is within reach, and of course the EU exports more to the UK than we export to them, we ought to be able to do a deal, and that's precisely why we're going for it. But in any negotiation, it takes two to tango. But I'm confident we can get that deal, which will secure businesses just like yours.
But if you can't, I mean, well, go on, James.
So I was just going to say, what is that deal? Like, nobody knows what this deal is, and it's going to affect so many businesses in so many ways, and nobody can tell us what is going to happen. We rely on a delivery company. Now, that delivery company that we use is going to have to change the whole way that it is run. Now, it's not only the EU that we sell to. We sell prints all around the world. Now, these prints have to go through multiple places. So, for example, if we sell prints to Sweden, they have to go through Denmark. If we sell prints to the US, they have to go through other places. If we have to sell prints to Australia, they go to New Zealand. Now, we have to organise every single agreement with every single place by March. How is that going to work? How is that going to happen? And it's going to affect so many people in so many ways.
Well, first of all, in terms of our plan, it's the Chequers plan, which would mean that you wouldn't see any friction or disruption to your trade. If it was a no-deal scenario, which I understand is what you're concerned about, obviously we'd be treated as a third country by the EU, and therefore your business model would be have to adapt in the same way as you do for non-EU.
But it basically means more costs, fewer jobs, doesn't it, for him?
It certainly means extra costs, which is why I've been really upfront and honest that the no-deal scenario is suboptimum, and that's why we're fighting so hard for the Chequers model.
But what do you say to Jacob Rees-Mogg and his colleagues, who almost seem to be sometimes salivating at the prospect of no deal, because it really would mean Brexit then, because there would be no links at all. I mean, you were kind of former allies of them. What do you say to them now?
Look, I'd listen to everyone across the spectrum, and I still hold them in high regard. I think Roberto Azevedo, the head of the WTO, put it well. A no-deal Brexit in terms of resort to WTO rules, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but it wouldn't be a walk in the park. And what you're hearing from your callers, businesses that will be directly affected, it will affect livelihoods because there'll be costs. Equally, beyond the short-term disruption that it would create and the extra costs in the short term, I'm confident that we could weather those risks and disruption and go from strength to strength.
You must be being deluged with people like James ringing your department saying, what on earth are you playing at? We can't have no deal.
Well, do you know what? This week I've talked to business groups from the big businesses like the CBI to the Federation of Small Businesses, and what they've said is, do you know what? We're pleased with the Chequers model because it is helping those just-in-time manufacturers and those for whom frictions at the border are a real issue.
I've got an email here from Nigel. No, not that one. Well, actually, it could be, judging from what I've just read. It says, if the ERG, along with Boris Johnson, David Davis and Steve Baker, come up with what could be a credible alternative to Chequers, will this be evaluated or just ignored?
But the key is, look, I listen to all viewpoints on this. I want to be open-minded about this. I think lots of people have got things to contribute. But the key in the question is credible. The plan's got to be credible in resolving three challenges. One, making sure we have frictionless trade for businesses like your last caller. Secondly, dealing with the Northern Ireland issue. And third, allowing us to conduct an independent trade policy. There's only one model out there that does that, and that's the Chequers model.
So, but you would be open to alternatives if maybe Jacob Rees-Mogg or whoever comes up with something that you think is worth looking at?
Well, it's a bit late in the day for that because they haven't so far. But what I'm saying is I always listen to different viewpoints and we always look at making sure we've got the best model. But that's how we got to the Chequers proposals.
OK, let's go to James, thank you very much for that. Let's go to Nina in Islington. Hi, Nina, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Raab. I'm an EU citizen. I've been living in London for 32 years, and I'm still very concerned about my future. I know a few weeks ago you said on TV that all EU citizens who are currently here will have the right to stay. Now, this has not been published, though, in the technical notes on your deal, because what I'm concerned is a no-deal scenario. So, first of all, I would like to know what would happen to EU citizens and their rights, including access to benefits, healthcare, school, etc., and why hasn't this been published in the technical notes yet?
So firstly, I've made clear, as you did during the referendum campaign, but as a minister, I've made clear that in the event of no deal, we would move to secure the position of EU nationals in this country. We recognise the huge contribution you've made. I'm half Czech myself. We're leaving the EU. We're not leaving Europe. In terms of the practical arrangements and the detail, we'll be looking and continuing to work up what we will say about that shortly. It hasn't been in the technical notices so far, but we're only about just over half the way through them. So we're making sure we get all the detail worked through properly. But what I can say to you is that give you the reassurance that we would secure your position, and we hugely value the contribution you've made to this country.
And would you agree settled status for EU citizens?
Yes, that's what I would like to know as well.
Well, I don't think it would necessarily be exactly the same as the settled status scheme under the withdrawal agreement that's been negotiated so far, because it would be it wouldn't be in a negotiated settlement. But what we would obviously look to do is
so what you're saying is, in a no-deal situation, the status of EU citizens would be less than it would be in an agreement. Well, how is that in any way fair?
Well, no, because there would be some things that just wouldn't be applicable, because we wouldn't have the treaty relationship between us and the EU. But in terms of the substance of it, in terms of making sure people can feel reassured about their rights and their ability to stay, I'm sure it would be effectively a similar kind of system. But let's do this not on a radio talk show.
No, let's do it. Let's do it on a radio talk show.
Well, I'm not
because
do that.
I think people like Nina have an absolute right to know what that, if there is a no-deal situation, and we've talked about whether that's likely or not, but it has to be a possibility. So therefore, if you're bringing out all of these no-deal papers that look at the consequences of that for different sectors of the economy, do the 3 million people in this country who are here as EU citizens, do they not have a right to know now exactly what their situation would be?
They absolutely need the reassurance that I've given that we would move swiftly to secure their position. In terms of the detail of it, it is far more complex than many of the other technical notices. We want to get the detail right, otherwise we wouldn't be giving any reassurance, and we'll do that as soon as possible.
You've had more than 2 years to do that.
Well, Actually, we have been doing a huge amount of work, but we've been focused on the negotiations. We've worked up a lot of the detail on citizens' rights in the negotiated format, and we would set out our proposals and the detail of what we do in the no-deal scenario in reasonably quick time, I can tell you that.
Nina, are you reassured?
Not really, because I would possibly also know, would the settled status application, would that be the same? Would that be just a 3 simple questions, or would there be more questions if there was no deal, for example? That's something I'm sure not just me, but other EU citizens would like to know.
Well, we're going to set out the detail when we're in a position to do it, so you've got it all there. But what I can tell you is that we would make it as simple and as user-friendly as we possibly can. We want to minimise the disruption, and we want to make sure the EU citizens in this country have been here, as you have, continue to be valued, welcomed, and feel secure and confident in their position. I appreciate until you get all the detail, you won't feel that, but we will do that soon.
When?
I can't give you an exact date.
Well, within weeks? January?
Well, it'll be within weeks. The question is how many.
Well, again, you see, you're not reassuring Nina and people like her who I think understandably want to know, well, when can we be reassured exactly what our future is going to be? Because otherwise you're going to get a drift of people back to their own countries, which would have severe consequences for various sectors.
Look, what I can say is that I feel passionately about this. I want to do it as soon as as possibly can be done. And there's a huge amount of detail to it. We need to make sure we get that right. But we are looking at this, we've been looking at this, and we'll be talking about this more soon.
Nina, thank you very much. More of your calls to come. I get the feeling that we could go on with this. Maybe we should cancel Cross Question. Maybe we should cancel our 9 o'clock phone-in and keep Dominic hostage in the studio until 10 o'clock. That would guarantee he'd never, ever come back, I guess. But there we go. We've got 14 more minutes for your calls to Dominic Raab. It's 7:46.
Eddie Mair, weekdays from 4 p.m. on LBC.
Would this second referendum be binding?
There's no doubt that would settle the matter.
What if your side lost again? And would all the people in people's vote, would they accept it?
We're in a very bad place and there is no way of getting out.
I just want to know if this people's vote that you clamour for, if it happens and you lose, will you, to put it bluntly, will you all shut up and go away?
Eddie Mair, weekdays from 4 p.m.
With which impartial advice, investigations and reviews. Keep questioning.
LBC.
Global's Make Some Noise Day returns on Friday the 5th of October. LBC's charity to help make some noise for those who don't get heard. This year we want to help even more charities, such as the Lily Foundation. Here's Louise, whose 2-year-old son Freddie has been helped by the organisation.
No parent goes on to have a child thinking one day they're going to lose them. The Lily Foundation are trying to do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right now you can get involved and help change lives by donating at lbc.co.uk.
Lucky, lucky, lucky me.
At Hyundai, we're big fans of hard work.
It's the reason our cars are so well made they come with a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty. It was hard work that helped us make our bold SUV, the new Tucson, even more refined inside and out. But hard work needs a reward, which is why you get an additional £500 list price saving if you test drive and buy the new Tucson before the end of September. Book your test drive at Hyundai.co.uk. Terms and conditions apply.
In cinemas now, Mile 22 was a lean and mean action movie.
This is an Overwatch operation.
Loaded with edge-of-your-seat action.
You feeling calm, Alice?
Not even a little.
I'm totally calm.
That's because you're mentally unstable.
Thank you.
Mark Wahlberg is back to his all-action best.
You're chaos. I think I might be worse.
We can do this all day. Does your wife know you think about me all day?
Mile 22.
Boom.
In cinemas now.
Are you ready?
Certificate 18.
As a cattle farmer, calving season means long days. So when my head hits the pillow, I don't want nightmares about losing calves.
Vodafone helps farmers rest and work more efficiently with our market-leading Internet of Things network and Moo Call, a device that sends alerts when a calf is on its way. Search Vodafone Business Solutions to discover how we're so much more than mobile. Vodafone. The future is exciting. Ready? Subject to area availability, minimum terms apply. Details at vodafone.co.uk. Business Solutions.
Doesn't 0% interest on Barclaycard balance transfers and purchases for 27 months sound like a great duet? 1.99% transfer fee applies, add £20 cashback, and you'll get a jamming trio. Offer ends 12th of October 2018. Get the card that's in tune with you at barclaycard.co.uk. Representative example, 19.9% APR representative variable, 19.9% purchase rate per annum variable, £1,200 assumed credit limit, subject to status, cashback on transfers of £2,000 or more. T's and C's apply.
To mushroom or not to mushroom? At your local co-op, you can pick up a pack of onions for just 49p, 6 tomatoes for 59p, and a pack of chestnut mushrooms for just 89p. Whether you agree with putting them all in a spag bol or not is up to you. Subject to availability. See participating stores for details.
Ian Dale on LBC.
10 to 7 here on LBC. Dominic Raab is with us, the Brexit Secretary, until 8. Several people commenting on the fact that Ollie Robbins is with the Prime Minister in Salzburg and you're not. Why is that? I mean, we're delighted that you're here, but...
I'd love to tell you, Ian, it was because you're more important than the Salzburg summit. Look, Ollie's the Prime Minister's Europe advisor. It's a heads of state only summit, so that's natural.
You could have been schmoozing on the sort of... while the hills are alive with the sound of Brexit?
I'm not sure. We've done enough schmoozing. It's down to brass tacks.
OK, right. Joe is in Abergavenny. Hello, Joe.
Hi, how's it going?
All right, thank you. What would you like to say?
So, I'm Joe. I'm from Abergavenny, 24 years old. Look, my pals and my family in Wales are concerned about Brexit, including those who voted for it. We've seen loads of jobs and companies threatening to move out of Wales because of Brexit. We've seen a massive rise in hate crime all across the UK. And young people are concerned about their future opportunities to live and to work outside of the European Union. In particular, the 1.5 million young people who were 16 when the referendum happened. They're now old enough to work for this country. They're old enough to pay tax in this country. They are old enough to fight and die for this country, but they never got a say on the future of this country. And that's probably why the majority of the young people in Wales are actually in favour of a people's vote. I'm supposed to be using this time for a question. So here it is.
Go ahead.
Knowing that young people are losing sleep about Brexit because it's threatening their futures, Minister, how do you sleep at night?
Well, look, I sleep pretty well at the moment because I'm so exhausted from the Brexit negotiations. But look, in terms of jobs and investment, foreign direct investment to the UK has been at the highest in Europe. We're actually doing pretty well economically. As I said earlier in the show, the economic growth figures have been accelerating, real wages are rising. The hate crime, look, I've got absolutely no tolerance of hate crime at all. But I think that it's certainly a challengeable assumption that hate crime rose as a result of Brexit. There was all sorts of changes.
It's not challengeable at all because the figures in the immediate aftermath of the vote demonstrated that hate crimes rose all over the country.
But what you saw also was a change in the way it was reported, and therefore, if there was an increase in hate crime, that's totally wrong. But also, I think it's very difficult to draw that out from the change in the way it was being recorded. In relation to 16-year-olds, look, I understand that youngsters voted Remain in greater numbers than voted Leave. But look, we have some basic rules in our democracy, and they include the age at which you do vote, and that's always been the case. And why would that be any different for general elections or other democratic mandates? I appreciate this is a big decision, it's a big historic decision, but I don't think you can change the democratic rules of the game. I also think there'll be a lot here in Brexit, if we look on the positives for youngsters, in terms of certainly under the Chequers models, we'll guarantee and we'll keep the kinds of things people want in terms of student exchange opportunities, travel around Europe, but there'll be some global horizons with the countries from Brazil to China, which are going to be the opportunities of the future for youngsters in this country. So I think there's a lot to be positive about in the years ahead.
Joe, quick comeback.
Yeah, well, look, Minister, first of all, on your first one, I don't think it's fair to say that you don't condone any hate crime and then you equivocate about whether or not it actually happens. But more importantly than that, and let me paint you a picture, there are going to be 18-year-olds in Wales from Cardiff to Wrexham. They'll be working for companies like Airbus, they'll be working for steel companies, they'll be working for Ford, and they will be facing their jobs leaving Wales, leaving the UK because of what's happened with Brexit. These are people who, a lot of them will have kids, a lot of them will have futures to look forward to. They don't know what's happening. And it has happened because of an ideological drive from the Conservative Party to do this thing that's actually in the long term going to damage them. And I'm just not sure if you answered their concerns.
Well, look, it's not an ideological thing. It was the fact that we had a national democratic vote, one of the biggest direct democratic mandates in memory, and it voted to leave the EU. But you're right to say that there are risks with leaving the EU, which is why the Chequers model will guarantee all those jobs and also promote the jobs of the future in those growth markets from Asia to Latin America. And in terms of the economy, actually, we've seen quite a lot of investors say, do you know what, the UK is the place to be, regardless of the outcome these negotiations. Just Relks, which is a publishing firm which is Dutch, half the UK, has just recently, last week I think it was, configured its HQ in the UK. So I do understand the concerns that you're talking about. That's why that's influenced the model for our negotiation and for the deal we want.
Okay. Joe, thank you very much for that. Email from Eddie. Give an example of a deal that's worse than no deal.
I think signing, effectively remaining subject to the free movement rules, the jurisdiction of the European Court, but not being able to be part of the decision-making process. I think that would be worse. And I think one that didn't allow us to take the opportunities of Brexit, whether they democratic control of our laws, border policy and immigration policy, but also in the free trade area. So I think in all of those areas you've got to judge it as a whole. But let me again emphasise, we want the Chequers deal, which is good for the UK, good for the EU, keeps our trade with our European friends and partners, but gives us those global opportunities as well.
David's in Bradford-on-Avon. David, what's your question, please?
Hi, Dominic. Hi, Ian.
Hi.
The Conservatives said in the last general election that they would respect the Brexit referendum result. Theresa May repeated that in a Lancaster House speech. However, the Chequers deal breaks both those promises and red lines, as it means we will effectively stay in the single market and the customs union for goods by agreeing to the EU common rulebook. And to ensure a level playing field, we will have to follow EU laws on things like agreed subsidies for industry, employment policy, and quite possibly environmental policy. So if the Conservative promises and red lines cannot be relied on, why should anybody vote for the Conservatives again?
So I'm afraid you're just wrong with various elements of that question. First of all, we're leaving the single market. We won't be subject to free movement rules. And it's not right to say just because in relation to those...
But we will be subject to regulations from the single market.
Some of them in those areas I described.
So we're not leaving the single market lock, stock and barrel, are we?
Well, you're caveating your words now. We will not be members of the single market, but we do want to have access to the single market for trade. But there's the group of rules that we've said up front, look, we'd agree to abide by.
Canada has access to the single market, but it doesn't have to abide by single market rules.
So just one other point that was made about agreeing to environmental rules, that's not right. I mean, we're not going to start chucking away the high environmental standards we have, but we'd have full control over what they would be. In relation to Canada, we're in a different trading relationship with the EU because we're on their border and because of the high link we have between the UK economy and the just-in-time manufacturing sectors here, which rely on supply chains. So I do think our relationship is different from Canada.
David, thank you very much. Chris has texted in to say Daniel Hannon's think tank published their blueprint for a free trade deal between the UK and the US yesterday, part of which would see the NHS open to foreign competition. Is this the price we have to pay for a free trade deal with the US?
No, I don't think that's right. And in fact, with the EU US negotiations, I think that fox was shot. But I do think we want to keep our global opportunities with the US. But even more importantly than with the US, I think are some of those areas where there'll be real growth in the future. And that's why I keep coming back to Asia and Latin America, and indeed Africa. And we've had a recent visit to Africa. Of course, much poorer, but the growth markets in terms of where the new opportunities will be, I think that's where they'll come from in the next 20 years.
Another text here: has working as Brexit Secretary caused you to feel any different as to the country's decision to leave the EU, i.e. would you vote differently if you had the information then that you have now?
No, I'd have voted the same way. I believe that this country's got huge potential, and I want us to be masters of our own destiny. And I think that's what Brexit is about, but it will involve compromises, and I want to get this over the line.
Final really difficult question here from John in Ilford. You have a black belt in karate. Are you the hardest man in Parliament?
No, I don't consider myself that, and but I do like my sport and physical activities.
Are there any other black belts in Parliament?
I don't know.
See, David Davis thinks he's a hard man, but I think you out-hard him, don't you?
I don't know about that. There's not a secret cabal of karate black belts, but I think look, keeping fit and doing sport, when you've got a pressured job, whatever it is, business or politics or whatever it might be, I do think keeping fit is part of a healthy work-life balance.
Well, we can't please all of the people all at the time. Somebody's texted, very disappointed in your interview, Ian. I thought you were a leaver. I'm actually doing my job. That's what interviewing is all about, but there we go. Dominic, Raab, thank you very much indeed for joining us. In a moment, it's this week's edition of Cross Question.